Hey everybody, welcome to the Future Freedom. I'm your host, Scott Horton. I'm from antiwar.com and I do a radio show on the Liberty Radio Network. And I'm here on Liberty.me every Thursday night to interview Jacob Hornberger, the founder and the president of the Future Freedom Foundation at fff.org. It was created in 1989. So at fff.org, they have approximately 100 million pages of written text of hardcore libertarianism on every issue under the sun. For 25 years now, better than that, 27 or something, right? And they put out a monthly journal called the Future Freedom, which you should subscribe to for a very reasonable price at fff.org/subscribe. You can read it online or get it in the mail, and it's really great. And so welcome to the show. How are you doing, Jacob?
Hey, doing well. Good to be back with you, Scott.
Very happy to have you here. And okay, I admit I already know the answer. I talked to you about it before, but did you read Jeffrey Goldberg's gigantic piece on the so-called Obama doctrine that hit today in The Atlantic?
I did read it. I read the whole thing.
All right. So now I know you're a big student of history and especially the history of the national security state. And I guess my question would be, did you learn anything that stands out to you that seems unique about President Obama and his relationship to the national security state during his presidency, at least as told in this article?
Well, I found the article. The article hit me in two ways. One, I'll confess that I found it extremely boring. I mean,
it's written by Jeffrey Goldberg, so.
Well, also just the overall theme of President Obama's presidency, I find really boring. Because here's your standard interventionist. I'm one of those who was really disappointed in Obama, and there's really no reason to be disappointed because he really didn't lead us in a different direction. But I thought here was a guy that was going to come into the presidency and really produce a monumental presidency, one that was going to move America in a really different direction. This was my hope, and I think this was the hope of a lot of leftists. That he would pull out of the Middle East, that he would end all this foreign interventionism. He would say, look, we've had 8 years of the Bush administration, and before that, the Clinton administration, intervening around the world with invasions, occupations, assassinations, regime change operations. I'm going to move America in a new direction. And so he pulls all the troops out. He restores civil liberties that Bush had infringed upon. He downsizes the military and the CIA. Okay, not a purist in the sense of a libertarian sense, but I thought, okay, here's a guy that has a chance to really move America in a new, different direction. And I think people would have followed him. They would have supported him. I mean, he's a new president. And it's a total fiasco. I mean, I really see the Obama administration as a continuation of the Bush administration. Okay, a little bit different. He pulls the troops out of Iraq, but that was pursuant to an agreement that Bush had entered into with Iraq. Iraq was sick and tired of American intervention. He kept the troops in Afghanistan. He kept the prison center over there in Guantanamo Bay prison. And then he had new interventions, Libya, Syria, maybe not to the full extent where he's got invasions and occupations, but certainly CIA support, involvement in these interventions, and they've all turned out to be the same fiascos. What I found really interesting about the article was his mindset. I mean, he has this mindset that he's been a force for good over there, that this was all done for America's interests and for the interests of people over there, which, giving him the benefit of the doubt, I mean, I find absolutely fascinating if that's really his mindset. And I think that's really the mindset of every interventionist. He convinces himself that all the people he's killing, that all the things he's destroying, that all the bombs that are dropping, that this is all a force for good. And he sees all the people that he's killing, many of whom he doesn't even know. He doesn't even know, the identities of the people or what they're involved. He accepts whatever the national security establishment says about him, that all of them are bad, that they deserve to die. They were terrorists. They were bad guys. They were all this. And so he's got this mindset of, I'm really a good person for what I'm doing over there. And that's the most fascinating part of the article as I see it. The rest of it to me is just standard interventionism, standard continuation of what Bush and all the other interventionists have done.
All right, now, so I want to go back to something you said there at the beginning that I think is very important, that the people would have supported him. This is how he got elected, is because clearly on the surface, never mind reality, the man is no Ron Paul. But on the surface, he was the exact opposite of George W. Bush. He was black, he was liberal, he was from Illinois, and he was a Democrat, and he was against Guantanamo, and he was against Iraq. And no, he wasn't good on everything, but it was that brand was what they sold, that this guy is gonna undo what Bush did. He's the apology to the world. Hey, world, we're so sorry that we foisted Bush on you twice in a row. We're gonna elect a black guy with a Muslim name now, and he's gonna try to make it better. That was how he got elected. That was what the American people chose him to do. And you're damn right they would have supported him if he had said, now listen, everybody, the Republicans are going to raise holy hell, but I need your support. We're going to close this Guantanamo prison because it's the right thing to do, and it's why you elected me. So everybody on the count of three say John McCain go to hell. And then he could have done it, but he didn't do it. And that's the thing that really leads me to my next question is, why not? Because I think as does come across in the article, and as we've known about him since 2007 and 2008, he does know better than this stuff, even as he does it anyway. Jacob?
That is a fascinating question, Scott. It really is the $64,000 question, is what causes a man to change as soon as he gets into office? Because let's not forget, he was also a lawyer, a constitutional law professor. I mean, he knows better. He knows the importance of civil liberties. Every law student in the country is ingrained with the idea of due process of law and presumption of innocence and trial by jury. He abandons all of that. I mean, it's just absolutely fascinating. He keeps these people in Guantanamo, and even if he had closed Guantanamo, which he still might do, he still believes in transferring the prisoners over there to some high security prison where he's going to hold them indefinitely anyway. I mean, it's just bizarre. And he could have led America in a new direction, as you pointed out, on foreign interventionism. I think Americans would have supported him. I think that's one of the big reasons why people are gravitating toward Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders. Not that they're, talking like Ron Paul, but they're like hinting in that direction. And I think there's a large body of people out there that are saying enough is enough, bring the troops home. And so they're willing to grasp at anything. Mm-hmm. All right. So to answer your question, I think that the big reason that what happened here is that people just underestimate the power of this national security establishment. And there's a guy named Glennon that's written a fantastic book called Double Government, where I forget where he teaches, but it's a major university, and it's a fantastic book. And he talks about how you have two levels of government. You have the ostensible government, the constitutional government, the one that was set up under the Constitution, consisting of the three branches. But he says ever since the advent of the national security state, those three branches have lost power. Now, what's interesting about them is they maintain the illusion of power, that they want Americans to believe that, everything's always is as always was, when the real power in this country is with the Pentagon, the CIA, and the NSA. That this is where the real force of government sits. And my hunch is that when a president comes into office, they pretty much tell him how the cow's going to eat the cabbage, and that this is the order of things in America's federal governmental system, and that if we need to go into Syria, we'll go into Syria. Now, it's not black and white. They work with the president, but I think there's unbelievable pressure there to mold a president in the direction of maintaining this huge apparatus that creates crises and creates wars and looks for opportunities to expand itself through ever-increasing budgets. And I just think it's very, very difficult for a president to come into office that isn't already committed to anti-interventionism to stand up against this enormous power within the system.
Well, it's interesting, and this is what I think is useful about the article, is, you know, just to read it between the lines. Some of it is overt. A lot of it is the context. Obviously, as you put it, you know, this delusion where Obama's really the one making all the decisions and he thinks he's a good person and doing the right thing. It's like he sees himself the way Jeffrey Goldberg sees him and writes about him, that, you know, he really is the one in charge of all of this, when, as you're explaining, that's not really how it works. There's a certain level of, you know, self-delusion, I think, in there as well. But then he also says, they jammed me on Afghanistan, talking about the surge in 2009 and 10, that they made him do it. Remember dithering, he's dithering. And McChrystal and Petraeus, you know, they, you know, call it whatever you want. They jammed him. They made him do that surge, even though he knew better. And of course, he wimped out and he let him do it. And because he said, it's gonna kill me in the general election next time if I tell Petraeus, no, it's not worth the political risk. And after all, the liberals didn't mind, because what do they care if it's their hero, the liberal Obama, doing the surge in Afghanistan? It's fine. And so he was politically covered from his own base, and he was protecting his right flank by doing the surge, and he went along with it. He did the jam, although he didn't blame the right. He blamed the Pentagon in the piece. He blames the Pentagon for jamming him. And then he says on Syria too, that there's this playbook where you're just supposed to always use the militarist solution no matter what. And everyone in Washington in the foreign policy consensus, they all have this playbook. They're all reading from the same book. And of course, he doesn't really mean foreign affairs, but pretty much, you know what I mean? That's what he's reading, you know, a little bit of the Weekly Standard in there, but that's the playbook. Something happened, let's explode it.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a very keen insight you had there about this jamming business. And I think a lot of that goes on. We just really cannot overestimate the power, the influence that the Pentagon and the CIA have, and the NSA as well. They have a huge army of supporters across the country, all the defense contractors, the communities that are dependent on their bases and so forth. I mean, they can mobilize enormous pressure. And I think your phrase that was in the article, that they jammed him into this surge in Afghanistan, is so appropriate. Now, what I also found interesting, though, is that, you know, he explains the pressure that he was under to invade or attack Syria, the bombing campaign, when they supposedly found, you know, chemical warfare and so forth that Assad was supposedly using. Mm-hmm. And he stood up against that, which I was impressed with, that he was able and willing to withstand that pressure. And from my recollection, as you can correct me if I'm wrong, but that Kerry was pressuring him to invade or to attack Clinton. Hillary Clinton was pressuring him with the argument that since you've already said you're going to do this, the U.S. will lose credibility. And I love that argument, you know, in a sarcastic sense, that we will lose face if you don't comply with what you had said before. We will be considered a weak nation. And so, yeah, there's this tremendous force that comes into this. And now, if I could go back a little bit of history to put things in perspective here. If we go back to the 60s when Kennedy was in power, Kennedy was, okay, he comes in as a Cold Warrior, but after he got jammed at the Bay of Pigs by the CIA, and then after he got jammed during the Cuban Missile Crisis, and even before that by the Pentagon, he said, to heck with you guys, and he goes to war against this whole power structure that Eisenhower called the military-industrial complex. And that was a real war that was taking place. They hated him. They said he was a communist sympathizer and appeaser. They brought up Munich. The Pentagon did, the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Kennedy ignored them and avoided them. He created his peace speech without consulting with them. So there was a real war going on. But after that, from his assassination on, every single president has fallen into line. Johnson comes in and sends the troops into Vietnam, when Kennedy was going to pull them out. Every president after that has just fit this mold. Now, you know, there's different variations as to who's more of an interventionist, a less interventionist. You know, is Obama less or more, so forth. But they all fall into this basic paradigm of foreign interventionism, ever increasing budgets for the Pentagon, the CIA, the NSA, supporting all the surveillance schemes, not going after the tortures. I mean, it's really interesting that you don't have a president or somebody running for president that takes this machine on in a direct sense. Sanders alluded to this back in the 70s when he said, let's abolish the CIA. He attacked the war in Vietnam, but notice that even he has conformed. He won't challenge them at a fundamental level. Why not, Scott? How come none of these candidates challenge this machine at a fundamental level?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think you nailed it before. I forget if I ever forwarded you this great Bill Hicks joke off of Rant and E Minor, where he says what happens is once he's talking about Bill Clinton back 93, 94. He says, once you get elected president, they take you back in this dark, smoky room with the industrialists and capitalist, donors who put you in, all the special interests who put you in there. And the film comes down, they're puffing on their big cigars, and the film screen comes down, and then they show you footage of the Kennedy assassination from an angle you've never seen before. And then they puff on the cigar. Any questions? And then he does this Bill Hicks impersonation. Well, just what my agenda is. First, we bomb Baghdad. And there you go. Welcome to the presidency, Bill. Go bomb Baghdad. And that's exactly what he did. And Bill was, the basis of the joke was when, the fake assassination attempt against Bush Sr. in Kuwait, when Bill Clinton shot 6 cruise missiles at Baghdad or 20 missiles and killed 6 innocent people, I think it was. And anyway, and he was saying that's what it is with all of them. They show you the Kennedy assassination from an angle you've never seen before and say, all right, so we're clear about who works for who around here. And that's the end of that.
Yeah, I mean, it's humorous, but I mean, you know what my position is on the Kennedy assassination.
Of course.
And so you don't even have to show such a film. I mean, everybody in Washington is aware of what people are saying about that assassination. And so you come into office, and this is what, now Glennon doesn't get into the assassination itself, but he talks about this is where the real power is. And power means, hey, don't take us on, because if you take us on, we'll work with you. We'll work with the judiciary. We'll make it look like we're complying with your judgments, like on Guantanamo. We'll make it look like you're in charge, but you ain't going to close down this facility. And so here Obama wants to close it down. He can't do it. And so they work with Congress, but Congress is not going to go after them in a fundamental sense. Nobody does. And this is what Glennon's point is. Now, interestingly enough, you've also got people referring more and more to this concept of the deep state. And this is what we've been talking about for many years, is that there is a deep state involved here that involves much more than the ostensible, oh, we have 3 branches of government that we all learn in public schools. That we have the deep state, which is the national security state, that is involved with all kinds of things that the electorate doesn't even have any idea of. The assassinations, the coups, the regime change operations, all the stuff these people do. And so, when I looked at this article, I said, okay, it's kind of interesting, but it's kind of boring to me in a sense because, and I keep emphasizing this, that I don't think the problem facing America is one that involves getting the right man in public office. I really think it's a structural problem that no matter who is elected, and I know people are now looking at Trump because he's the great man, he's going to make America great. Well, he's going to now be in charge of this huge apparatus. My hunch is that they're going to be in charge of him like they're in charge of Obama. But until you do something about the structure itself, this totalitarian-like structure, I think America is going to be in a world of hurt. And that's why, I look at the article and I say, okay, interesting, Obama has all these good intentions. And I even found interesting that at the end of the article, he says something like, look, we have to acknowledge realistically that we can't really affect things in the Middle East. We can't really change things at a fundamental level with all our invasions and occupations and so forth. And I thought, wow, well, that's kind of an interesting thing to say in the last year of your administration. Why did it take you so long? And it brought up, Eisenhower's farewell address, where Eisenhower says, beware the military-industrial complex. It's a grave threat to our freedom and democratic processes. Why do you wait till the 8th year to bring it up?
Right. Yeah, exactly. Well, and of course, like Chief Wiggum on The Simpsons would say, we're powerless to help you, not to harm you. We can completely tear your societies apart and kill millions of people and create millions of widows and shallow graves and swimming pools full of blood. That's easy. Doing anything to make it better after that, yeah, you can pretty much forget about that.
Yeah, and you know what else, Scott, is that they still don't get it on the terrorism. He says, well, we've got to fight terrorism and so forth. They don't get that the anti-American terrorism is a direct consequence of their intervention. I mean, it's just this blind spot.
Well, they certainly refuse to acknowledge it. No question about that.
Okay, but I'm giving the guy the benefit of the doubt, like he really is speaking the truth. And I'm thinking, I mean, is he really that obtuse? I mean, he looks at Russia's invasion of Crimea, and it never occurs to him in this article that was a direct consequence of NATO moving closer and closer to Russian borders. I mean, it just, how can anybody be that obtuse?
Well, I'm
curious about your perspective on the article. I know you read all of it, or you read most of it. I'm really curious. What was your reaction to it?
Well, the thing on Ukraine is he'd have to admit to covert action on that one. So, the overthrow of the government there. So, of course, he's going to lie. But I'm sorry, what was the thing he said right just before that? Because it cracked me up.
Well, about the terrorism and
oh, yeah. It was about Goldberg says, I first encountered, this is the author of the article, says, I first encountered Obama back in 2006, and I'd heard of him. And I'd read this speech that he gave against the Iraq War. And then he quotes Obama's speech that he gave against the Iraq War in 2002 when he was a state senator from Illinois. And it's the most simple kind of thing. Like, this particular war seems like it's probably not a good idea. And it's going to probably make, help our terrorist enemies in their recruitment and that kind of thing. And so I love wars. Don't get me wrong. But this particular Iraq invasion is just on its face. It's so stupid to do this. And we really ought to not do this. And then here's the part that I thought was the punchline, was Jeffrey Goldberg says, so I was just intrigued at how this state senator from Illinois was able to have such insight that our leaders like Bush and Cheney and Paul Wolfowitz and myself were unable to fathom. And of course, Jeffrey Goldberg wrote all the stories in the New Yorker about how Saddam was best friends with Osama and how if only we would take out Saddam, it was going to save us from the terrorists. But he's, I think, taking, as you said, take them at their word. I think Goldberg is being honest that was just blown away that some guy from Illinois knew better than to start a war with Iraq. When, of course, 150 million Americans knew better than to start a war with Iraq. It was just people like Goldberg who led the other 150 into the quagmire.
Well, and the libertarians, I mean, this was libertarians' shining moment. We stood against that war. Now, some of us also stood against the Afghan war, but some libertarians supported that. But libertarians were pretty unanimous on the Iraq war, and we kept telling people this is going to be a mega disaster, and it has been. I mean, there wouldn't be an ISIS. See, now here they are saying we got to get ISIS. And well, the other interesting thing I found about the article is that Obama seemed to acknowledge that ISIS is not an existential threat to the United States. And yet on the other part, he says, we should only be intervening when it's in our interest and so forth. Well, why are you intervening then right now to stop ISIS? What's the point? And then that gets into the whole humanitarian intervention that he seemed to be defending. But here, ISIS is a direct result of the Iraq war invasion. And they say, well, we have to get ISIS, but it never occurs to them what's going to happen after they get ISIS. I mean, do they really think that ends everything? I mean, did it end everything when they got Al-Qaeda, when they got Saddam, when they got, whoever, I mean, all the rest of the regime change operations they've ever done? It never stops. It never stops because the more they kill people, the more people get angry. I mean, I guess you read where they kill these 150 people recently, and they just said, well, they're just bad guys. Well, who are they? Well, they're just bad guys. Well, the fact is that every one of those 150 people have family members, brothers, sisters, parents, cousins, friends that are now sitting there saying, okay, should we retaliate against the United States for killing our buddies and our father, our brother, or sister, or whatever? And so this is, now, like I've always said, for the last 25 years. This is the greatest terrorist producing machine in history. And they keep doing it. They keep, they're making things worse. They're pouring fuel on a really bad fire.
Yep. Well, I always get the quote wrong. But it's, I think, Upton Sinclair who says that it's always hard to get someone to see the truth when their paycheck depends on them not seeing it and that kind of thing. So it's just the same as economics. You and I could have had this exact same discussion with, I don't know, Jim Bovard about the agriculture department and about how all they do is ruin everything, which is great for business if you work for the agriculture department. And it just gives them more and more power to keep intervening and failing upwards forever, which is the same thing with the national security state. The worse job they do, the better for them. And, I'm starting to think that they've noticed. Then go ahead and screw up on purpose sometimes.
You hit the nail on the head. I mean, this machine is absolutely ingenious when it comes to maintaining its existence. Remember, it came into existence as a Cold War apparatus. And the Cold War ended some 20-something years ago, and yet it's still here. And they are absolute masters at creating the crises that then they use to justify their existence. And they went into the Middle East after they lost the Soviet Union in the Cold War ending, and they started poking hornets' nests, Persian Gulf intervention, sanctions, and so forth. And then they get the terrorist attacks, 93 World Trade Center, the USS Cole, the 9/11. And then, now that war on terrorism, you need us more than ever. And, by the way, in case that starts fizzling out, we're going to move NATO closer to Russia. And, by the way, we're now going to pivot to the South China Sea because now we got another major crisis with China. And, over here, North Korea is, doing things. So, yeah, they're masters. And because their paychecks and the enormous power they have in this governmental structure necessarily depends on permanent, ongoing crises, wars, and everything, so they can say, we're protecting you. We're your last bastion against the barbarians who will come and get you and take you away if it's not for us. It's a racket.
All right, now back to what you said at the beginning of the interview about the aborted war on Syria in 2013. And, a huge part of that was that the American people were against it. And they were completely against it. And for whatever reason, and I think, a bunch of probably, right-wing Islamophobic propaganda worked for our benefit in this case, where, Frank Gaffney and some of the neocons were saying, man, really, Hornberger's right. This one's going to benefit the, Al-Qaeda. So even if you don't like Assad, for God's sake, man, you don't want to benefit Al-Qaeda. So I think that message got around on right-wing talk radio and that kind of thing. And what this amounted to in the late summer of 2013 was a real anti-war consensus. And it also helped very much that the Joint Chiefs of Staff didn't really want to do it, that the British House of Commons had already told David Cameron that he was forbidden as well. But, we were keeping very close track of the polls at antiwar.com, and it was 90% to 6% with, 4 undecided when it came to, opposition to attacking Syria. And that number barely budged, but that was the best opposition that we have. It was 90% really against that war. So that is a hell of a lot of a basis to work from. But so if it's too late to elect Ron Paul and all of that, and there is no one man who's really strong enough to overthrow the national security state, how can we go about forging that consensus among all the unorganized masses who we know more or less agree with us at this point to get them, because that's what it takes, is for all the people who are unorganized to tell the very few who are quite organized at our expense that they have to knock it off. And we can win. We outnumber them, 200 million to 1 or whatever. Well, no, but there's a lot more of us than them. But so the question is, how do we make it work, Jacob? What do we do? And don't just tell me, vote Democrat or vote Republican. I know you're not going to.
Yeah, I'm not going to say that. But I also want to point out on the Syria thing that they also had Libya going on, where here was your classic regime change operation. Oh, we're just oust the dictator and everything will be hunky-dory. And look at the chaos there now, the massive killing, the enormous mess that's there. So I'm sure Obama was looking at that, which was Hillary, Hillary's little intervention, and saying, do I want to get involved in this again in Syria? Because as you point out, there's no guarantee that somebody worse won't get into power in Syria, like ISIS or something. And I think,
and I should say too, because it's an error by omission that I made there, that of course there has been covert action against Assad in Syria by the USA since 2011. We're only talking very specifically about the aborted air war campaign after the fake sarin attack in August and September of 2013. I just wanted to be clear for the audience.
Absolutely. The CIA's in there furnishing armaments and so forth, and they're trying to decide which ones to support and all this. But let's face it, whoever replaces Assad out of this bunch of rebels is going to be at least as brutal, if not much more so. But Scott, I say that we continue doing what we're doing. That's the solution. I mean, I would love to see Bernie Sanders do a direct assault on this whole machine and take Hillary Clinton on at a fundamental level on foreign policy and foreign interventionism. I wish he'd talk like he was talking back in the 70s. That would make an exciting race, but that's not going to happen. They're all on the same page. What we need to keep doing is doing what we're doing, because if the solution is we create a new climate of opinion in among the populace, and when that happens, the politicians are chameleons. They want to stay in power. They want to get into power. If they sense that the mood of the public is changing, they will change. They're not going to stand out there alone. They're chameleons. And so the only solution, I know it sounds like, oh my gosh, we don't have time and it's too difficult, but this really is the only solution: to do what you and I are doing on this show, to continue writing the articles, do what Annie Ward does, do what FFF does, and have all the libertarian organizations continue standing fast against non-interventionism, to show that this is the real solution, restoring a constitutional republic to our land. That it doesn't lie. It doesn't even lie with just electing a Ron Paul to office. It lies in structural changes here, so that whoever gets into power, they don't have the means by which to do these kind of things. But the ultimate goal is to reach a climate of opinion which is consistent with the climate of opinion that our founding fathers believed in: non-interventionism. John Quincy Adams' 4th of July speech, "In Search of Monsters to Destroy," in 1821. No entangling alliances. This is our heritage. And so the only way to do that is to keep doing what we're doing, keep spreading the ideas with the aim of reaching a critical mass in favor of our philosophy.
That, my friends, is Jacob Hornberger. He is the founder and the president of the Future Freedom Foundation, the publisher of their journal, which comes out monthly, The Future Freedom, which is also the name of this show. And this has been The Future Freedom. We're here every Thursday night from 8 to 8:30 here on Liberty.me. Thank you very much again, Jake. Appreciate it.
It's always a pleasure, Scott. Enjoyed the show. Thank you.